The howl of the winter wind drowned out Rebecca Collins' desperate whimpers as she stumbled through the darkness, her torn boots sinking into the snow with each labored step. It was 1873 in the unforgiving Wyoming territory, and death stalked her as surely as the cold that had already claimed the feeling in her fingertips. 3 days without food. 1 day without water. The meager supplies she'd managed to take when fleeing her uncle's home had run out faster than she'd anticipated, and the unexpected blizzard had disoriented her completely. What was supposed to be a straight journey to Sweetwater had become a wandering nightmare. Through the swirling white, Rebecca spotted a dark shape, a structure. Hope surged through her weakened body, giving her one last burst of strength. As she drew closer, she made out the shape of a barn, sturdy and imposing against the white backdrop. Light glowed faintly from within, promising warmth and shelter. Her frozen fingers could barely form a fist as she pounded on the wooden door, each impact sending pain shooting up her arm. "Please," she whispered, her voice carried away by the wind. Then louder, "Please help me." The door swung open, and Rebecca found herself looking up into the face of a man silhouetted by the golden lantern light behind him. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a face shadowed by several days' worth of beard, he regarded her with startled blue eyes. "Lord Almighty," he breathed, taking in her snow-covered form, the hollowness of her cheeks, the desperation in her eyes. Rebecca swayed on her feet, darkness creeping at the edges of her vision. "I have nothing to offer, but I beg you, please." Strong arms caught her as her knees buckled. Through the haze of encroaching unconsciousness, she heard his deep voice, steady and sure. "You're safe now." The world went black. Rebecca awoke to warmth, real, blessed warmth that seeped into her bones. For a moment she lay still, afraid that if she moved, the sensation would disappear, and she would find herself back in the snow, dying slowly. A crackling sound drew her attention, and she opened her eyes to see a stone fireplace with flames dancing inside it. She was lying on a narrow bed covered with thick quilts in what appeared to be a small but tidy cabin. The scent of something cooking made her empty stomach clench painfully. "You're awake," Rebecca startled, turning her head toward the voice. The man from the barn stood near the fireplace, stirring something in a pot. In the proper light, she could see him clearly, mid-30s perhaps, with dark brown hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck, and those striking blue eyes set in a weathered but handsome face. "Where am I?" Her voice came out as a rasp. "My homestead, about 15 miles outside of Sweetwater." He abandoned his cooking and approached the bed, carrying a cup. "Can you sit up? You need to drink something?" Rebecca tried to push herself upright, but her arms trembled with the effort. Without a word, the man slipped an arm behind her shoulders and helped her into a sitting position, then pressed the cup to her lips. "Small sips," he instructed. "You're badly dehydrated." The water was cool and sweet on her parched tongue. Rebecca had to force herself not to gulp it down. "My name's Brody Callahan," he said as she drank, "and you look like you've been through hell, miss." "Rebecca Collins," she answered after swallowing. "And yes, I suppose I have." Brody nodded, his expression revealing nothing. "Miss Collins, once you've had some broth and rested a bit more, I reckon you'll be telling me how you came to be pounding on my barn door in the middle of a blizzard, half dead from starvation." There was no accusation in his tone, just a statement of fact, but Rebecca felt a flash of fear. What would this stranger do if he knew she was running from the law, or at least from a man who controlled the law in her hometown? "I got lost," she said simply. "I was traveling to Sweetwater and the storm took me by surprise." A slight raise of his eyebrow told her he didn't quite believe her, but he didn't press. "Well, you won't be going anywhere for a few days at least. That storm's set to last and you're in no condition to travel." Rebecca wanted to protest, to insist that she needed to keep moving, but exhaustion washed over her again. The reality of her situation was stark. She had nowhere to go, no money, and no strength. For now, at least, she had no choice but to accept this stranger's hospitality. "Thank you," she whispered, "for saving my life." Something flickered in Brody's eyes, compassion, perhaps. "Get some rest, Miss Collins. We'll talk more when you're stronger." As Rebecca drifted back to sleep, She thought she felt a gentle hand brushing hair from her forehead, but she couldn't be sure it wasn't just a dream. The next time Rebecca woke, sunlight was streaming through the cabin's windows. For a moment she was disoriented, then the memories of the previous night came flooding back. She was in Brody Callahan's home, having nearly died in the blizzard. This time she managed to sit up on her own, though her body ached from the ordeal. She glanced around the cabin, taking in details she'd missed before. It was a simple place, one main room with the bed she occupied, a table with 2 chairs, the fireplace, and some basic furniture. A closed door likely led to a second room. "Good morning," Brody's voice came from the doorway. He carried an armful of firewood, snow melting on his coat and hat. "Feeling any better?" Rebecca nodded. "Yes, thank you." He set the wood down by the fireplace and removed his coat and hat, hanging them on pegs by the door. "Hungry? I've got some porridge ready." Her stomach answered with an embarrassingly loud growl, and Brody's mouth quirked up in a half-smile. "I'll take that as a yes." He brought her a bowl of steaming porridge with a dollop of honey and a cup of coffee. The simple food tasted better than anything Rebecca could remember. As she ate, Brody busied himself around the cabin, stoking the fire and putting away supplies. There was something calming about watching him move, efficient and self-contained. "I realized last night," he said without looking at her, "that I didn't ask if anyone would be missing you. Is there someone I should try to get word to when the weather clears?" Rebecca set down her spoon. "No," she said softly, "there's no one." Brody turned to face her then, studying her with those keen blue eyes. "That's a lonely thing, Miss Collins. Please call me Rebecca." She looked down at her bowl, and yes, I suppose it is. "Well, Rebecca," he said, her name sounding different in his deep voice, "once you're done eating, there are some things we need to discuss." Alarm prickled through her. "What things?" "Like how long you plan to stay, for one. And what your intentions are once you're well enough to leave." Rebecca bit her lip. I don't know, I haven't thought that far ahead." Brody crossed his arms. "You're running from something or someone." It wasn't a question, and Rebecca didn't bother denying it. "Yes, the law, no." She answered quickly, then amended, "Not exactly. My uncle is the sheriff in Pine Ridge. He's not a good man. After my parents died 5 years ago, I went to live with him. At first it was bearable, but lately." She trailed off, unsure how much to reveal to this stranger. "Lately." Brody prompted, his expression guarded but not unkind. Rebecca took a deep breath. "He arranged for me to marry his friend, a man old enough to be my father. When I refused, my uncle became violent, said I owed him for taking me in, and this was how I'd repay the debt." She shuddered at the memory. "I had to leave. I took what little money I had saved and ran." Brody was silent for a long moment, his jaw tight. "Your uncle, would he come looking for you?" "I don't know. Probably. He doesn't like being defied." He nodded slowly. "Sweetwater's a small town. If someone's looking for you, word will get around fast." Fear tightened Rebecca's chest. "I don't have anywhere else to go." Brody ran a hand through his hair, clearly wrestling with some internal debate. Finally, he said, "You can stay here until you're strong again. After that, we'll figure something out." Relief washed over Rebecca. "Thank you, I won't be a burden, I promise. I can cook and clean, help with whatever needs doing around here." "We'll talk about that when you're on your feet," Brody said firmly. "For now, just rest." As he turned to go, Rebecca called after him, "Mr. Callahan." He paused at the doorway. Brody, she corrected herself. "Why are you helping me? You don't know me. I could be lying about everything." He considered her question for a moment, his expression thoughtful. 8 years ago, I was the one lost in a blizzard. Someone took me in, no questions asked, saved my life." A shadow crossed his face. "I reckon I'm just passing on the favor." With that, he stepped outside, leaving Rebecca to wonder about the man who had saved her life and what ghosts from his past might be haunting him. The next few days passed in a blur of sleep and healing for Rebecca. She gradually regained her strength, able to stay awake for longer periods and even move around the cabin a bit. Brody kept her well fed with simple but nourishing meals and made sure she drank plenty of water and herbal tea. He was gone for much of each day, tending to his livestock and the various chores that kept his small homestead running. But in the evenings, they would sit by the fire, and sometimes he would tell her about his life. Brody had come to Wyoming 5 years earlier, seeking a fresh start after the war between the states. He'd fought for the Union, though he spoke little of those years. With his army pay and some money saved from working cattle drives, he'd purchased this land and slowly built it into a modest but successful horse breeding operation. Mostly quarter horses, he explained one evening as they shared a pot of coffee. Good, sturdy stock for ranchers and farmers. Nothing fancy but dependable. Like their owner, Rebecca observed with a small smile. A flush crept up Brody's neck and he looked away. I suppose that's one way of putting it. Rebecca found herself increasingly drawn to this quiet, solid man. There was a steadiness to him that she found comforting after the chaos of her recent life. And though he maintained a respectful distance, she sometimes caught him watching her with an expression that made her heart beat a little faster. On the 5th day, Rebecca insisted on helping with the cooking. I'm not an invalid anymore, she argued when Brody tried to protest, and I'm going stir-crazy just sitting here. He relented, and she set about making a stew with the rabbit he'd trapped that morning. As she worked, she became aware of him watching her from across the room where he was mending a piece of tack. Is something wrong? She asked, glancing up. Brody shook his head. No, it's been a long time since anyone else moved around this cabin. It's nice. The simple admission touched her deeply. Do you get lonely out here? Sometimes, he admitted. But I've got my horses and I make it into town every couple of weeks for supplies. It suits me. Rebecca stirred the pot thoughtfully. I think I understand that. After living with my uncle, being alone sounds peaceful. It can be, Brody agreed. But there are moments when I wonder if I've made the right choice, cutting myself off like this. Their eyes met across the room and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of shared solitude. The moment was broken by a loud pounding on the door. Brody was on his feet instantly, his hand moving to the rifle that hung on the wall. Stay back, he murmured to Rebecca, who had gone pale, and keep quiet. He approached the door cautiously. Who's there? It's Will Parker, came a voice from outside. Got some news you'll want to hear, Callahan. Brody relaxed slightly and opened the door to reveal a middle-aged man with a weather-beaten face, dressed in the practical garb of a rancher. Will, Brody greeted him, come in out of the cold. The man stepped inside, stamping snow from his boots. His eyebrows rose when he spotted Rebecca. Didn't know you had company, Callahan. This is Rebecca, Brody said simply. She's staying with me for a while. Rebecca, this is Will Parker. He owns the neighboring ranch about 5 miles east. Will touched his hat politely. Madam, Rebecca nodded in return, trying to hide her anxiety. Would this man spread word of her presence? What news brings you out in this weather? Brody asked, drawing Will's attention back to him. There's a stranger in Sweetwater asking questions about a young woman traveling alone, Will said. Described her as about 25, auburn hair, green eyes, said she's his niece, ran off after some kind of family dispute. Rebecca felt the blood drain from her face. Her uncle had found her trail. Will didn't miss her reaction. His shrewd eyes moved from her to Brody. I take it this is the young lady in question. Brody's stance shifted subtly, placing himself between Rebecca and the door. What did you tell him, Will? Will snorted. Nothing. Man's got shifty eyes and I don't trust him. Sheriff doesn't either. Asked me to spread the word to keep an eye out but not to engage with him directly. He looked at Rebecca again. Whatever you're running from, miss, it might be best if you stay put for a while. At least until we figure out what this fella's really after. He's my uncle, Rebecca said, her voice barely above a whisper, and he wants to force me to marry his friend. Will's expression hardened. Well, that ain't right. No woman should be forced into such an arrangement. He turned to Brody. You planning to keep her here? Brody nodded. For as long as she needs. Good. Will moved back toward the door. I'll let a few trusted folks know to keep quiet about any young women in the area, and I'll come by if I hear anything more. After Will left, Rebecca sank into a chair, trembling. He found me, I knew he would. Brody knelt beside her. Rebecca, look at me. When she raised her eyes to his, he continued, he hasn't found you yet, and if Will Parker's on your side, that's a good thing. He knows everyone in this valley and people listen to him. But what if my uncle comes here? What if he forces you to hand me over? Brody's expression turned hard. No man forces me to do anything on my own land. You're under my protection now, and I aim to keep you safe. The fierceness of his declaration surprised her. Why? Why risk yourself for me? His gaze softened. Because it's the right thing to do, and because... He hesitated, then stood abruptly. Because no one deserves to be treated the way your uncle treated you. Rebecca sensed there was something more he'd almost said, but she didn't press. Instead, she rose and returned to the stew, which was in danger of burning. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." That night, sleep eluded Rebecca. She lay awake in Brody's bed. He had been sleeping on a pallet by the fire since her arrival, despite her protests, listening to the wind and thinking about her uncle. Harold Collins was not a man who gave up easily, especially when his pride was at stake. And she had wounded his pride deeply by running away. A sound from the main room caught her attention. Soft footsteps, then the creak of the front door opening and closing. Rebecca slipped out of bed and went to the window. In the moonlight, she could make out Brody's figure walking toward the barn. Without thinking too much about it, she pulled on her boots and wrapped herself in one of Brody's spare coats, which engulfed her smaller frame. Then she followed him outside. The night was clear and cold, the snow glistening under a nearly full moon. Rebecca's breath formed clouds in the air as she made her way to the barn. The door was ajar and warm light spilled out from within. She found Brody sitting on a bale of hay, his head in his hands. One of the horses, a beautiful bay mare, had her head over the stall door and was watching him with what seemed like concern. "Brody," Rebecca called softly. He looked up, startled. "Rebecca, you should be inside where it's warm." "So should you." She approached cautiously. "Is everything all right?" He sighed, running a hand over his face. "Just couldn't sleep. Sometimes the memories get too loud at night." Rebecca sat down beside him, pulling the coat tighter around herself. "The war, partly." He reached out to stroke the mare's nose. "This is Sadie. She was a gift from my brother before he died." "I'm sorry," Rebecca said, understanding dawning. "Was it during the war?" Brody nodded. "Benjamin was 3 years younger than me, shouldn't have even been there, but he lied about his age to enlist, wanted to follow his big brother." His voice was thick with old grief. "Took a bullet meant for me at Gettysburg." Rebecca laid a gentle hand on his arm. "That's why you took me in, isn't it? Not just because someone once helped you, but because you couldn't save him." Brody was silent for a long moment. "Maybe," he finally admitted, "but that's not the only reason anymore." Their eyes met in the lantern light, and Rebecca felt something shift between them, a door opening to possibilities she hadn't allowed herself to consider. "We should go back inside," Brody said, breaking the moment. "It's too cold out here for you." As they walked back to the cabin, their shoulders occasionally brushing, Rebecca felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the physical temperature. For the first time since fleeing her uncle's house, she felt a flicker of hope for the future. The next morning brought a change in the atmosphere between them. There was a new awareness, a tension that hadn't been there before. They moved around each other carefully, like dancers learning a new step. "I need to ride into town today," Brody announced after breakfast. "We're running low on supplies, and I want to hear what people are saying about your uncle." Rebecca felt a spike of fear. "Is that safe? Safer than waiting for him to find us unprepared?" Brody checked his revolver before tucking it into his holster. "I won't be gone long." "Keep the door locked, and the rifle is loaded if you need it." She nodded, trying to hide her anxiety. "Be careful." Something in her voice made him pause. He crossed the room to stand before her, then, in a gesture that surprised them both, he reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "I will. Try not to worry." After he left, Rebecca kept herself busy with chores, cleaning the cabin thoroughly, and then tackling the mending she'd noticed in Brody's work basket. The physical activity helped distract her from worrying about what might be happening in town. It was late afternoon when she heard hoofbeats approaching. She grabbed the rifle and moved to the window, relief flooding through her when she recognized Brody's sturdy form. He entered the cabin with an armful of packages and a grim expression. "What happened?" Rebecca asked, setting aside the rifle. "Your uncle's still in Sweetwater, asking questions. He's telling people you're mentally unstable, that you need to be brought home for your own good. Brody's jaw was tight with anger. Some folks are starting to get suspicious, though. His story doesn't add up, and he's been drinking heavily and losing his temper. Rebecca wrapped her arms around herself. That sounds like him. I spoke with the sheriff, man named Ross Jenkins. He seems decent enough, said he can't legally intervene unless your uncle breaks the law, but he's keeping an eye on him. Brody set down his packages and removed his coat. I also spoke with the widow who runs the boarding house, Mrs. Fletcher. She might have a position for you if you want it. Rebecca blinked in surprise. You found me a job, just exploring options, Brody said, not meeting her eyes. Figured you'd want your independence once this is all sorted. A pang of disappointment shot through her. Of course he was already planning for her departure. What had she expected? That he would want her to stay. That was thoughtful of you, she said, keeping her voice even. Thank you, Brody nodded, still not looking at her. There's something else. A letter came for me from Santa Fe. My sister's husband died last month, and she's asking if she can come stay with me for a while, bring her 2 children. Oh, Rebecca said, understanding immediately what this meant. It wouldn't be proper for her to remain in the cabin with Brody once his sister arrived. When will they come? Not until spring, most likely. The mountain passes are too dangerous now. He finally met her gaze, but I wanted you to know. Of course. Rebecca turned away, busying herself with unpacking the supplies he'd brought. I'm sure Mrs. Fletcher's position will work out fine. Once it's safe for me to go into town. The silence that fell between them was heavy with unspoken words. That evening they ate a subdued meal, both lost in their own thoughts. After they'd finished, Brody pulled something from his pocket and placed it on the table between them. I got you this, he said gruffly. Thought you might like something of your own. It was a small leather-bound journal with a pencil attached by a cord. Rebecca picked it up, touched by the simple gift. It's lovely, thank you. You mentioned you used to enjoy writing before your uncle. He trailed off. Anyway, I thought you might want to start again. The thoughtfulness of the gesture brought tears to her eyes. You remembered that. I only mentioned it once in passing. Brody's expression softened. I remember everything you tell me, Rebecca. She reached across the table and laid her hand over his. That means more to me than I can say. His fingers curled around hers, warm and strong. For a long moment they sat like that, connected by touch and gaze, until Brody slowly withdrew his hand and stood. I should check on the horses before turning in, he said, his voice rough after he left. Rebecca opened the journal and began to write, pouring out the complicated feelings that were growing in her heart for the quiet cowboy who had saved her life. 3 more days passed, with the tension between them growing like a living thing. They moved around each other carefully, both aware of the attraction simmering beneath the surface, both hesitant to acknowledge it openly. On the 4th day, Will Parker returned with troubling news. Your uncle's getting desperate, he told them as they sat around Brody's table. He's offering a reward now for information about your whereabouts, $50. Rebecca gasped. That's a fortune around here. Will nodded grimly, enough to tempt some folks, that's for sure. And he's been drinking at the saloon, making threats about what he'll do when he finds you. Brody's expression darkened. Has he mentioned me specifically? No, but he's heard rumors that a woman matching Rebecca's description might be staying at one of the outlying homesteads. He's planning to start searching them one by one. Rebecca felt sick with fear. How long before he reaches here? Hard to say. Could be days, could be longer. He's not exactly moving in an organized fashion. Will looked at Brody. You need to decide what you're going to do, friend. This situation is coming to a head. After Will left, Brody paced the cabin like a caged wolf. We need to get you somewhere safe, he muttered. Somewhere he won't think to look. Where? Rebecca asked. If he's searching every homestead. Brody stopped pacing. My sister has a friend in Denver, a good woman who runs a respectable boarding house for young ladies. If we could get you there. Denver, Rebecca felt as though she'd been struck. That's hundreds of miles away. It would be temporary, Brody said, not meeting her eyes. Just until your uncle gives up and goes home, then you could come back if you wanted to. The hesitation in his voice gave her pause. Would you want me to come back? Now he looked at her, his blue eyes intense. Yes, he said simply, I would. Rebecca's heart raced at the admission. Then I'll go to Denver if you think it's best. I'll make arrangements, Brody said, his voice tight. There's a stage that runs from Sweetwater to Cheyenne twice a week. From there, you can catch the train to Denver. When? Rebecca asked, already dreading the separation. The next stage leaves in 3 days. We'll need to get you into town without being seen. 3 days. Just 3 more days in this cabin with him, and then she would be gone, perhaps for months. The thought was unbearable. Brody, she said softly, I don't want to leave. He closed his eyes briefly, as if in pain. I don't want you to go either, but I want you safe more than anything else. And after, when it's safe to return, Brody crossed the room to stand before her. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he raised his hand to cup her cheek. After, he said, his voice husky, we can talk about what comes next, if you still want to. Rebecca leaned into his touch. I will, she promised. Nothing will change how I feel. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her, but instead he stepped back, dropping his hand. We should start making preparations, he said, his practical nature reasserting itself. There's much to do before you leave. That night, Rebecca lay awake, listening to Brody's breathing from his pallet by the fire. 3 days. 72 hours. Then she would be on a stagecoach, bound for a city she'd never seen, leaving behind the man who had come to mean everything to her. She must have fallen asleep eventually, because she woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Brody was already up and cooking breakfast, his movements efficient in the early morning light. I've been thinking, he said when he noticed she was awake. It might be safer if you left sooner. Tomorrow's stage, perhaps. Rebecca sat up, alarmed. Tomorrow, but that's so soon. Brody set a plate of food on the table. The sooner you're safely away, the better. I've written a letter to my sister's friend in Denver explaining the situation. You'll take it with you? What about you? Rebecca asked, trying to hide the tremor in her voice. What will you do when my uncle comes here looking for me? I'll tell him the truth that you were here but you've gone. I won't tell him where. Brody's expression was determined. He has no legal right to force you to return with him or to marry anyone. The sheriff confirmed that. Rebecca picked at her breakfast, her appetite gone. What if he doesn't believe you? What if he becomes violent? I can handle myself, Brody said firmly. I've faced worse than a bully with a badge. They spent the day making preparations. Brody gave her some money, a loan. He insisted when she tried to refuse and packed a small bag with provisions for the journey. Rebecca wrote in her new journal, trying to capture the tumult of emotions she was experiencing. As night fell, a heavy silence descended on the cabin. They moved around each other carefully, each aware that this was their last evening together for what might be a long time. Finally, as Rebecca was preparing for bed, Brody spoke. I have something for you. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, holding it out to her. It was a carved wooden horse, small enough to fit in the palm of her hand, but detailed with remarkable skill. Did you make this? She asked, turning it over in her fingers. Brody nodded. Last night after you went to sleep. It's not much, but I thought, something to remember this place by. It's beautiful, Rebecca said, her throat tight with emotion. Thank you. Impulsively, she stood on tiptoe and pressed a kiss to his cheek. She felt him stiffen in surprise, then relax. Rebecca, he said, his voice rough with emotion, when this is over. When this is over, she finished for him, I'll come back, I promise. His arms came around her then, pulling her into an embrace that felt like coming home. Rebecca leaned into his strength, memorizing the feel of him, the scent of pine and leather that clung to his clothes. Be safe, he murmured into her hair. That's all I ask. I will, she promised. And you must be careful too. My uncle is dangerous when he's angry. Brody pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. I've survived a war and 8 Wyoming winters. I can handle one angry lawman. Despite her worry, Rebecca smiled. Then, gathering her courage, she reached up to touch his face. Brody, she whispered, before I go, understanding dawned in his eyes. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his head until his lips met hers in a kiss that was gentle yet firm, a promise of things to come. When they broke apart, both were breathing harder. Brody rested his forehead against hers. Now I have something to remember too, he said softly. Morning came all too soon. Brody had already hitched his wagon when Rebecca emerged from the cabin, dressed in her now clean clothes and the warm coat he had insisted she take. The journey to Sweetwater was tense, both of them scanning the horizon for any sign of pursuit. Brody had chosen a roundabout route, avoiding the main road, and they approached the town from the west, where the stage depot was located. "Wait here," Brody said when they were a short distance from town. "I'll go check if the coast is clear." Rebecca watched anxiously as he rode ahead, returning about 20 minutes later with a relieved expression. "Your uncle's at the saloon, according to the station master. Has been there most of the morning. The stage is on time, due in about an hour." He helped her down from the wagon. "I've bought your ticket all the way to Denver. The station master is a friend. He won't mention you to anyone." Rebecca clutched her small bag, reality sinking in. "This is really happening." Brody's expression softened. "It's not forever, Rebecca, just until it's safe." They waited in the small depot building, sitting side by side on a wooden bench, not speaking much but drawing comfort from each other's presence. When the distant rumble of the approaching stagecoach reached them, Rebecca felt her heart constrict. "It's time," Brody said, standing and offering her his hand. Outside, the stagecoach pulled up in a cloud of dust. The driver called out, "5 minutes, folks, 5 minutes in Sweetwater." Brody turned to face Rebecca, taking both her hands in his. "Remember, in Denver, go straight to Mrs. Holloway's boarding house. The address is in the letter. She's expecting you." Rebecca nodded, trying to commit his face to memory. "I'll write as soon as I arrive. I'll be waiting." Brody squeezed her hands. Rebecca, whatever he was about to say was cut off by a shout from down the street. "There she is. Rebecca." They both turned to see Harold Collins striding toward them, his face contorted with anger, hand hovering near the gun at his hip. "Go," Brody urged, pushing Rebecca toward the stagecoach. "Get on now, but I'll handle him. Go." The driver was already helping other passengers board. Rebecca allowed herself to be hustled up into the coach, her eyes never leaving Brody as he positioned himself between her and her approaching uncle. "Collins," Brody called out, his voice carrying clearly. "That's far enough." The sheriff stopped about 20 feet away. "This doesn't concern you, mister. That's my niece, and she's coming home with me." "No, she isn't," Brody replied calmly. "She's a grown woman, free to go where she pleases." Harold's face flushed dark with rage. "She's my responsibility, not anymore." Brody stood his ground, shoulders squared. "She's leaving, and you're going to let her go." Rebecca watched in terror from the stagecoach window as her uncle's hand moved to his gun. "Brody," she cried out in warning, but Brody was faster. In one fluid motion, he drew his revolver and had it trained on Harold before the older man could clear his holster. "Don't," Brody said, his voice like steel. "I don't want to shoot you, but I will if you force my hand." A small crowd had gathered, drawn by the confrontation. Among them was a man wearing a sheriff's badge, presumably Ross Jenkins, Rebecca guessed. "What's going on here, Collins?" Jenkins asked, stepping forward. Harold's eyes darted between Brody's unwavering gun and the new arrival. "This man's interfering with family business," he snarled. "My niece is leaving of her own free will," Brody finished. "Isn't that right, Sheriff?" Jenkins nodded slowly. "The young lady made a statement to me yesterday, said she's 25 years old and going to visit friends in Denver. Nothing illegal about that." Rebecca realized Brody must have arranged this during his trip to town, ensuring the local law would be on their side. Harold's face contorted with fury. "This isn't over," he spat. "Yes, it is," Jenkins said firmly. "Miss Collins is free to go where she pleases. And you, sir, are creating a disturbance in my town. I suggest you holster that weapon and calm down, or you'll be spending the night in my jail." The stagecoach driver called out, "All aboard. We're leaving." Rebecca's eyes met Brody's one last time as the coach began to move. He nodded once, a promise in his gaze, before turning his attention back to her uncle. As the stagecoach rolled out of Sweetwater, Rebecca pressed her face to the window, watching until Brody's figure became a distant speck, then disappeared altogether. The journey to Denver was long and grueling. Rebecca spent 3 days on the stagecoach to Cheyenne, then another day on the train to Denver. Throughout the trip, she clutched Brody's carved horse in her pocket, drawing comfort from the small token, Mrs. Holloway's boarding house proved to be a clean, well-run establishment in a respectable neighborhood of Denver. The proprietress herself was a widow in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. "So you're Brody Callahan's friend," she said after reading his letter. "Well, any friend of Brody's is welcome here. His sister Sarah is one of the finest women I know." "Thank you for taking me in on such short notice," Rebecca said, feeling oddly comforted by this connection to Brody. "It's no trouble. We have a room available, and Sarah wrote that you might be interested in work as well." Rebecca nodded eagerly. "Yes, I need to support myself." "Good. I can always use help around the house, and there's a dressmaker 2 streets over looking for an assistant. Can you sew?" "Yes, quite well actually." Mrs. Holloway nodded approvingly. "Then we'll speak with her tomorrow. For now, you look exhausted, my dear. Let me show you to your room." The weeks that followed settled into a routine. Rebecca worked mornings at the boarding house, helping with cleaning and cooking, and afternoons at Madame Laurent's dress shop, where her fine stitching was quickly appreciated. The work was honest and satisfying, and she began to save a little money, but her thoughts were never far from Brody. She wrote to him weekly, pouring her heart onto the pages, telling him about her new life and how much she missed him. His replies came regularly, though less frequent than her letters due to the remoteness of his homestead. His words were less eloquent than hers, but no less heartfelt. He told her about the daily workings of his ranch, how Sadie had foaled a beautiful colt, how the winter was finally releasing its grip on the land, and always, at the end of each letter, some variation of the same sentiment. "The cabin is too quiet without you. Come home when you can. Home." The word resonated in Rebecca's heart. She had never thought of any place as home since her parents died, but somehow, in just those few weeks, Brody's simple cabin had become exactly that. 2 months after her arrival in Denver, a letter came that made her heart race. "Your uncle has gone back to Pine Ridge. Sheriff Jenkins confirmed it yesterday. The way is clear for your return if you still wish to come back. I understand if you've made a life for yourself in Denver and choose to stay, but know that you are welcome here for as long as you want. The door is always open for you." Brody, Rebecca read the letter 3 times, her hands trembling with excitement and relief. She could go back. Back to Wyoming, back to Brody. That evening, she gave notice to both Mrs. Holloway and Madame Laurent, who expressed regret at losing her but understanding of her decision. "Love is not something to take lightly, my dear," Mrs. Holloway said with a knowing smile. "Brody Callahan is a good man." "One of the best," Rebecca blushed. "I never said you didn't have to," the older woman chuckled. "It's written all over your face every time you receive one of his letters." 3 days later, Rebecca boarded the train to Cheyenne, her few possessions packed in a carpet bag, her savings sewn into a hidden pocket in her skirt. The return journey seemed both endless and too quick endless in her eagerness to see Brody again, too quick as nerves began to set in. What if things had changed? What if, in her absence, he had reconsidered his feelings? What if the connection they had shared was not as strong as she remembered? By the time the stagecoach rolled into Sweetwater, Rebecca was a bundle of nerves. She scanned the street anxiously as they pulled up to the depot, but there was no sign of Brody. "Miss Collins." A familiar voice called as she stepped down from the coach. It was Will Parker, waving to her from across the street. He hurried over, grinning broadly. "Welcome back." "Brody asked me to meet you. He wanted to come himself, but one of his mares went into labor this morning." Relief and understanding washed over Rebecca. "Of course, is everything all right? Far as I know, my wagon's over here. I'll take you out to his place right away." As they drove through the familiar landscape, Rebecca's anticipation grew. Wyoming in late spring was beautiful, the hills green with new growth, wildflowers dotting the meadows. "Brody's been like a man possessed these past few weeks," Will commented as they drove. "Fixed up the cabin, built new furniture, even planted flowers by the front door. Never seen anything like it." Rebecca felt a warmth spread through her chest. "Really?" Will chuckled. "Really, man's got it bad if you don't mind my saying so." They crested a hill and suddenly Brody's homestead came into view. Rebecca's heart leaped at the sight. The cabin looked much the same, though she could see the fresh paint on the shutters and the splashes of color from flower beds that hadn't been there before. As they pulled up to the house, the barn door opened and Brody emerged, wiping his hands on a cloth. He froze when he saw the wagon, his eyes locking on Rebecca. She didn't wait for Will to help her down. She was out of the wagon and running before she even realized she had moved. Brody strode forward to meet her, and then she was in his arms, being lifted off her feet and spun in a circle, his laughter mingling with hers in the clear spring air. "You're here," he said when he finally set her down, his hands cupping her face as if to convince himself she was real. "You came back. I promised I would," Rebecca said, smiling up at him. Behind them, Will cleared his throat. "I'll just leave your bag here, shall I?" Brody looked over, seeming to remember they had an audience. "Will, thank you for bringing her." Will tipped his hat, a knowing smile on his face. "My pleasure. I'll be seeing you both." With that, he climbed back into his wagon and drove off, leaving them alone. Rebecca suddenly felt shy despite the joy of their reunion. "How is your mare?" Will said she was in labor. "She delivered a healthy filly about an hour ago." Brody's eyes never left her face. "Would you like to see?" He led her to the barn, where a beautiful black mare lay in a bed of straw, a wobbly-legged foal nestled against her side. "Oh, she's beautiful," Rebecca breathed, kneeling to get a better look. The foal raised her head curiously, ears pricked forward. "Just like her mother," Brody agreed. "Strong and brave." Rebecca felt him watching her and looked up to find his gaze intense with emotion. "I missed you," she said simply. "I missed you too, more than I can say." He offered his hand to help her up. "Come inside, there's something I want to show you." The cabin was much as she remembered it, but with small changes that caught her eye: new curtains at the windows, a colorful quilt on the bed, a vase of wildflowers on the table. But what drew her attention was the new piece of furniture against one wall, a small writing desk with a chair. "I made it for you," Brody said, watching her reaction. "I thought, if you decided to stay, you might want a place to write." Rebecca ran her fingers over the smooth wood, noting the careful craftsmanship, the small details that must have taken hours to perfect. "It's wonderful," she whispered. "Rebecca," Brody's voice was serious now. She turned to face him, her heart pounding. "I know this is sudden, you've only just returned, but these past months without you, I've had a lot of time to think about what I want." He took her hands in his blue eyes earnest. "I want you to stay. Not as a guest, not temporarily, but permanently, as my wife, if you'll have me." Joy bubbled up inside Rebecca, so intense it was almost painful. "Are you sure? Your life was peaceful before I came along with all my troubles." Brody smiled, a full, unguarded smile that transformed his face. "Peaceful, yes, but lonely. You brought something to this place, to my life, that I didn't even know was missing." He squeezed her hands. "I love you, Rebecca Collins. I think I started falling in love with you that first night when you were half dead on my doorstep, but still had the spirit to keep fighting." Tears of happiness welled in Rebecca's eyes. "I love you too, and yes, Brody Callahan, I will marry you." His smile was brighter than the sunshine streaming through the windows as he pulled her into his arms and sealed their promise with a kiss that spoke of homecoming, of belonging, of a future built together. 2 weeks later, they were married in Sweetwater's small church, with Will Parker standing as witness and Mrs. Fletcher from the boarding house dabbing at her eyes in the front pew. Sheriff Jenkins attended as well, bringing news that Harold Collins had been removed from his position as sheriff in Pine Ridge after complaints about his abuse of authority. "Seems your escape inspired others to speak up," Jenkins told Rebecca at the small reception afterward. "You're safe now, truly." Rebecca looked across the room to where Brody was speaking with Will, his face animated in a way she'd never seen in those early days. He caught her watching and smiled, a private smile just for her. "Yes," she agreed, her heart full. "I am." That evening, as they returned to the cabin, their home now, truly and legally shared, Brody lifted Rebecca into his arms to carry her across the threshold. "Welcome home, Mrs. Callahan," he said softly. Rebecca wrapped her arms around his neck, remembering that desperate night months ago when she had pounded on his barn door, starving and afraid. "You told me I was safe," she murmured. "That very first night, do you remember?" Brody nodded, setting her gently on her feet but keeping his arms around her. "I meant it then, and I mean it now. You'll always be safe with me. I know." She reached up to touch his face, this man who had saved her in more ways than one. "And you'll always be safe with me too." As the sun set over the Wyoming hills, painting the sky in brilliant hues of gold and pink, Brody lowered his head to kiss his wife, both of them secure in the knowledge that they had found not just safety, but home in each other's arms. 1 year later, Rebecca sat at her writing desk, putting the finishing touches on her latest story. The small house that Brody had built adjoining the original cabin was filled with the afternoon sunlight, making the new pine boards glow golden. The sound of laughter drew her to the window. In the yard, Brody was showing their 8-month-old daughter, Sarah, named for his sister who had decided to remain in Santa Fe after all how to pet one of the gentler foals. The baby, secure in her father's strong arms, reached out a chubby hand to touch the velvety muzzle, then squealed with delight when the foal nudged her fingers. Rebecca's heart swelled with love for her little family. The past year had brought changes. She could never have imagined that desperate night when she'd stumbled through the snow to pound on a stranger's barn door. Brody's horse breeding business had flourished, with his reputation for quality stock spreading throughout the territory. Rebecca's stories, drawn from her experiences and the tales she heard from travelers passing through Sweetwater, had found a modest audience in a Denver newspaper that published them monthly. Their life wasn't always easy. Wyoming demanded resilience from those who chose to make it their home, but it was rich with purpose and love. As Rebecca watched, Brody looked up and caught sight of her at the window. His face broke into that smile she treasured, the one reserved only for her and now for their daughter. He whispered something to the baby, then pointed toward the house. Sarah's face lit up when she spotted her mother, and she waved enthusiastically. Rebecca waved back, then gestured for them to come inside. As they approached the house, she moved to the door to meet them. "How's the writing coming?" Brody asked as he entered, passing their daughter to her. "Almost finished," Rebecca replied, settling Sarah on her hip. "Though this little one makes it challenging to find uninterrupted time," Brody chuckled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "She's curious like her mother, wants to be in the middle of everything. And stubborn like her father," Rebecca countered with a smile. They moved together into the kitchen, where Rebecca had stew simmering for dinner. The domesticity of the moment, Brody setting the table while she stirred the pot with Sarah babbling happily on her hip, still struck her sometimes with its miraculous ordinariness. "Will and his wife invited us for dinner on Sunday," Brody mentioned as they sat down to eat. "To celebrate their anniversary." Rebecca nodded. "That would be lovely. We can bring them some of those preserves I put up last month." As they ate, they discussed the day's events and plans for the coming week. Brody had 2 new foals to train, and Rebecca needed to finish her story before the mail coach left for Denver on Tuesday. Later, after Sarah had been put to bed in her small room, Rebecca joined Brody on the porch where they often sat in the evenings, watching the stars emerge. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked, leaning against his shoulder. When I arrived, Brody's arm tightened around her. "Sometimes. Mostly I think about how close I came to not hearing you. I almost didn't go out to the barn that evening." The thought sent a chill through Rebecca despite the warm spring air. "But you did, and you said those words that changed everything." "You're safe now," Brody quoted softly. "Little did I know I was the one being rescued that night." Rebecca looked up at him questioningly. "I was so alone before you," he explained. "Existing, not living. You brought life back to this place to me." She reached up to touch his face, still marveling sometimes that this good, strong man was hers. "We rescued each other then." He turned his head to kiss her palm. "And we'll keep doing so every day." As night settled over the Wyoming plains, Rebecca Callahan rested in her husband's embrace, secure in the home and the love they had built together. From desperation to joy, from starvation to abundance, From a stranger's barn door to a life overflowing with purpose, her journey had been unexpected but perfect in its own way. And it had all begun with those 4 simple words that had saved her life and her heart. "You're safe now."